Christmas Eve had a way of humbling even the most dangerous men, but that night it shattered Alexander Williams completely. 8 years after the divorce, he stood in the falling snow outside an elegant apartment building, the kind with glass doors that reflected everything: success, wealth, and the ghosts of mistakes you couldn't bury. No bodyguards flanked him tonight. No convoy of black SUVs idled at the curb with engines running and men ready to kill on his command. Just him, alone, holding a silver-wrapped gift he had no right to bring. Through those glass doors, through the lobby, up on the third floor where golden light poured from floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see her world. A towering Christmas tree sparkled with white lights. Stockings hung from an elegant mantel. The glow of a life that had moved on, healed, thrived, without him. He told himself it was closure. One visit, one silent gesture to prove he wasn't the monster she remembered. Then he would disappear back into his world of blood and shadows and power that meant nothing on nights like this. Alexander adjusted his collar against the cold and stepped through the glass doors. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against polished marble floors that echoed too loudly in the silent lobby. Each step toward the elevator felt like walking toward judgment. The elevator ascended slowly, too slowly, giving him time to second-guess everything. His reflection stared back at him in the brushed steel doors. Dark hair styled perfectly, strong jaw tight with tension, eyes that had seen too much violence trying to look softer. He looked like a man who controlled empires. He felt like a beggar. When the elevator doors opened on the third floor, he stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Her door was at the end, number 304. He'd known the address for years, had men watching from a distance to ensure she was safe, protected from enemies who would use her to hurt him. She never knew. He'd promised himself he'd never intrude. But tonight was different. Tonight, 8 years of silence felt like too long. Alexander raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. For the first time in 8 years, the Mafia boss, the man who'd built an empire on fear and calculated violence, didn't know if he had the right to disturb her peace. Before he could decide, the door opened. Warm golden light spilled into the hallway along with the sound of Christmas music playing softly, laughter from a television, the ordinary sounds of a home filled with life. And there she stood, Carissa Smith. Her auburn hair was longer than he remembered, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore green Christmas pajamas, festive, covered in tiny ornaments and snowflakes, the kind of casual, unguarded thing she never would have worn when they were married, when she'd always had to be camera-ready, polished, perfect for his world. Her face looked softer now, calmer. The worry lines that had creased her forehead during their marriage had faded. She'd been holding a dish towel, probably in the middle of cleaning up dinner, living her quiet evening. But the moment her eyes met his, everything stopped. Shock flickered across her face first, eyes widening, lips parting in disbelief. Then something deeper, something darker. Fear. Old fear, the kind that doesn't forget. "Alexander," she whispered, his name barely audible, like speaking it too loudly might make the nightmare real. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain why he was standing at her door after 8 years of silence, but no words came out. His throat closed. All the speeches he'd rehearsed in the car dissolved into nothing. And then, movement behind her. A small figure darted across the living room in the background, moving fast, laughing, small feet sliding across hardwood floors in socks. A child's voice rang out, bright and excited and completely unaware of the tension at the door. "Mom, look! I found the candy cane ornament. Can I put it on the tree?" Alexander's chest tightened. The boy skidded to a stop near the Christmas tree, holding a plastic ornament shaped like a candy cane, far too big for his small hands. He looked toward the door, curious about the stranger, and their eyes met. The world tilted. Alexander's breath left his body. The boy was about 8 years old, auburn hair like his mother's, but with a face that Alexander recognized because he saw it every morning in the mirror. Strong brows, a determined set to his jaw, and those eyes, intense, gray-green, piercing, exactly like his own. Even the way the child tilted his head slightly, studying the stranger with cautious curiosity and intelligence beyond his years, it was unmistakable. Alexander didn't breathe. His hands got numb. The gift he'd been holding nearly slipped from his fingers. 8 years. The boy was 8 years old. The exact amount of time since Carissa had walked out of his life after the worst fight they'd ever had, after he'd thrown a chair across the room in a jealous rage, after she'd looked at him with terror in her eyes and said, "I don't know who you are anymore." Carissa turned slowly, instinctively, her hand reaching out toward the boy's shoulder. Her fingers were trembling. "Joseph, sweetheart," she said, her voice tight but controlled, motherly and protective. "Go wash your hands, okay? Dinner's almost ready." Joseph, his name was. The boy nodded, glanced once more at Alexander with those unnervingly familiar eyes, then ran down the hallway, disappearing around a corner, his footsteps fading into the distance. Silence crashed into the space between them. Alexander swallowed hard, his mind racing, counting backward, doing the math he didn't want to do. 8 years since the divorce. The boy was 8.
The timing was... How old is he? Alexander's voice came out rougher than he intended, barely above a whisper. Carissa didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Her hand gripped the edge of the door like she might close it in his face. Her whole body was braced, preparing for impact. 8, she finally said. The number hit him harder than any bullet ever had. 8 years, he repeated, his voice hollow. 8 years since I left, Carissa finished, her tone clipped, defensive. Alexander took a step back, gripping the gift tighter, his knuckles white. His mind was spinning, replaying memories, nights, the last time they'd been together before everything exploded, before the accusations, before the rage, before she'd packed a bag in the middle of the night and vanished from his life. She'd been pregnant. She'd been pregnant when she left him, and she never said a word. His voice came out low, controlled, but strained with emotion he couldn't contain. "Carissa, may I come in?" Every instinct written on her face told him the answer was no. She wanted to slam the door, protect her son, protect the life she'd built far away from him. It showed in the way she stood in the doorway like a barrier, in the way her breathing quickened, in the way her eyes darted back toward the hallway where Joseph had disappeared. But after a long, agonizing second, she stepped aside. "Just for a minute," she said, her voice firm. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed too loudly in the sudden stillness. Alexander stood in the entryway, taking in the space. The apartment was beautiful, spacious, modern, elegant but warm. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Christmas decorations filled every corner. A massive tree stood near the windows, covered in ornaments that were clearly handmade, some lopsided, covered in glitter and glue, chosen by small hands with big ideas. A paper star sat slightly crooked on top, held together with tape and hope. It wasn't the cold, sterile penthouse they'd shared during their marriage. This was a home, a real home, filled with life and laughter and love, and he'd had no part in building it. "I didn't know," Alexander said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. Carissa crossed her arms, creating physical and emotional distance between them. "You weren't supposed to." He looked at her sharply, pain flickering across his face. "Was he—" "Don't," she cut him off quickly, her tone protective, not angry. "Not yet." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and helplessness he rarely allowed himself to. "I didn't come here for this," he admitted, his voice raw. "I just wanted to leave a gift, apologize for everything. I didn't expect—" He stopped, his breath uneven, his eyes drifting back toward the hallway. "Him," he finished quietly. From somewhere deeper in the apartment, Joseph's voice floated back, innocent and unaware. "Mom, can I have another cookie before dinner?" Carissa closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. "One more, baby, then you wash up." Alexander watched her in that moment, The way her voice softened completely when she spoke to Joseph, the way her entire body changed, relaxed, became something gentler. She wasn't the woman he remembered from charity galas and tense business dinners surrounded by dangerous men who feared him. She was someone else now, someone stronger, someone who'd survived him. "You look different," he said softly. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "So do you." "He looks less loud," he said. She almost smiled but caught herself. "Less dangerous." The kitchen timer beeped from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Carissa moved toward it, clearly needing the distraction, needing to do something with her hands. "You should go," she said without looking at him. "I will, but not yet." She turned to face him, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion in her eyes. Not physical tiredness, but the weight of 8 years of carrying a secret this heavy alone. "Alexander, this isn't fair," she said. "I know," he replied, his voice softening in a way it rarely did. A small crash came from the hallway, something plastic hitting the floor, followed by Joseph's sheepish voice. "Oops." Carissa sighed, a mother's sigh, familiar and fond and exasperated all at once. "I'll be right back." She disappeared down the hallway, leaving Alexander alone in the living room. His gaze drifted to the framed photos on the wall. Carissa and Joseph at the park, the boy on a swing, mid-laugh. Carissa and Joseph at the beach, building sandcastles. Joseph covered in flour in a kitchen, helping his mother bake. Halloween costumes, birthday parties, first day of school photos. A life. A full, rich, beautiful life. Without him. Alexander's chest ached with the pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 8 years. He heard small footsteps and turned just as Joseph appeared again, this time holding a delicate glass ornament shaped like a snowflake. He handled it carefully, seriously, like it was the most important thing in the world. The boy stopped a few feet away, studying Alexander with those intense eyes. "Mom said not to touch this one," Joseph said seriously, then glanced at the ornament, then back at Alexander. "But I'm very responsible." Alexander found himself crouching instinctively, bringing himself closer to the child's level, making himself less intimidating. His voice came out gentler than he expected. "That looks like an important job." Joseph nodded, solemn. "It's Grandma's. She gave it to us before she went away." Alexander's throat tightened. He remembered Carissa's mother, a kind woman who'd never quite trusted him, who'd seen through the polished exterior to the violence underneath. "Then you should be very careful with it," Alexander said softly. Joseph studied him for a long moment, his expression serious beyond his years. "Who are you?" the boy asked directly. Alexander's breath caught. He glanced toward the hallway where Carissa had disappeared, then back at the child, his child, standing in front of him, waiting for an answer. Alexander started, then stopped. What could he say? What right did he have to claim any title, any connection after 8 years of absence? "I'm an old friend of your mom's," he finally said. Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly, evaluating. The boy was smart. Too smart. "You look scary," Joseph said bluntly. Alexander blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the first one in longer than he could remember. "That's fair," Alexander said, a small smile tugging at his lips despite everything. Joseph seemed pleased with the response, then asked with the unfiltered honesty only children possess, "Did you make my mom sad?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. All the air left his lungs. The smile vanished from his face. He looked into those eyes, his eyes, and saw a boy who'd learned to be protective of his mother, who'd grown up sensing something missing, someone absent, and had learned to guard against people who might hurt the one person who'd always been there. Alexander's voice came out quiet, honest, stripped of all pretense. "Yes," he admitted, "I did." Joseph's expression grew more serious, older somehow. "Are you going to make her sad again?" Before Alexander could answer, Carissa's voice came from the hallway. "Joseph, come here, sweetheart." She appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes locked on Alexander with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked like a warning. Joseph glanced between them, sensing the tension, then walked to his mother's side. Carissa placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Go to your room for a minute, okay? I need to talk to our guest." "But now, Joseph." The boy looked up at his mother, reading something in her expression, then nodded and disappeared down the hallway. The moment he was gone, Carissa turned to Alexander, her voice low and fierce. "You need to leave right now." Alexander stood slowly, his hands raised slightly in surrender. "Carissa." "8 years," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "You had 8 years to find me, to ask, to wonder, and now you show up on Christmas Eve and—" She stopped, her breath catching, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Alexander's voice was soft, broken. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Carissa's jaw tightened. "No." The word was a dagger. "Why?" he asked, and his voice cracked on the question. She looked at him, really looked at him, and when she spoke, her words were measured, careful, and devastatingly honest. "Because you weren't safe to be around." The truth of it settled over Alexander like a weight he'd carried for 8 years without acknowledging. The rage, the jealousy, the violence that had leaked into their marriage until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but run. He nodded slowly, accepting it, because what else could he do? "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Carissa's eyes filled with tears. Sorry doesn't give him back 8 years. I know, but You need to go," she repeated, firmer this time. Alexander looked toward the hallway where Joseph had disappeared, then back at Carissa. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, let me." "Go, Alexander." He stood there for one more moment, memorizing the space, the photos on the wall, the sound of Christmas music still playing softly in the background, the faint laughter of his son coming from a bedroom down the hall. Then he turned toward the door. But before he reached it, he stopped and looked back at her one last time. "I'm coming back tomorrow," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion breaking underneath. Carissa's expression was unreadable. "Don't." "I have to," Alexander said. "He's my son. You don't get to claim that, not after 8 years. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he said something that caught even him by surprise. "I'll earn it." And with that, he walked out the door, back into the cold hallway, back into the elevator that descended too quickly, back into the snowy night where he stood on the sidewalk and looked up at those glowing windows. Through the glass, he could see Carissa moving around the apartment, could see the shape of a small boy running back into the living room, could see the life that had continued without him, the life he'd destroyed with his own hands. Alexander Williams, the man who controlled an empire, who commanded fear with a glance, who built his power on ruthlessness and calculated violence, stood alone in the falling snow. And for the first time in 8 years, he felt the full weight of what he'd lost. Not just a wife, a family, a son who didn't know him, a chance at redemption he might never deserve. But as he stood there, frozen in the cold, one thought burned through the regret, the pain, the crushing weight of lost time. I'm not losing them again. What Alexander didn't know was that the boy, Joseph, was standing at his bedroom window at that exact moment, watching the man in the dark suit standing alone in the snow. And in his small hand, he held a photograph he'd found hidden in his mother's closet years ago, a photograph of his mother smiling, younger, happier, standing next to a man who looked exactly like the stranger who'd just left. The same intense eyes, the same strong jaw, the same face Joseph saw every time he looked in the mirror. And for the first time in his 8 years of life, Joseph whispered a question into the darkness that his mother had never been able to answer. "Is that my dad?" But what Joseph was about to discover would change everything, not just about the stranger at the door, but about the secrets his mother had been protecting him from his entire life. Will Alexander be able to prove he's changed? Can Carissa ever forgive the man who terrified her? And what happens when Joseph learns the truth about who his father really is and the dangerous world he comes from? If you want to know what happens next, if you want to see whether this broken family can find healing or if the past is too damaged to repair, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next part of this story will break your heart wide open. Drop a comment below. Should Carissa give Alexander a second chance, or should she protect Joseph from a man who might never truly change? The answer might not be what you expect. This is a story about lost time, impossible choices, and whether redemption is ever truly possible. And it's only just beginning. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, staring at nothing, replaying every second of what he'd seen through those glass doors. The matching pajamas, the boy's laugh, those eyes, his eyes, staring back at him with innocent curiosity and no recognition. By morning, he'd made his decision. At 7 a.m., he was back in his car, driving through streets still quiet with early weekend calm. No plan, no speech prepared, just a desperate need to see them again, to confirm what his mind still couldn't fully accept. He parked across from Carissa's building and waited, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the third-floor windows for any sign of movement. 20 minutes passed, then 40. He was about to leave when the lobby doors opened. Carissa stepped out, holding Joseph's hand. They were dressed casually, her in jeans and a cream sweater, the boy in a puffy winter coat and light-up sneakers. They were heading somewhere normal, ordinary, living their Saturday morning like any other family. Alexander got out of the car. The moment Carissa saw him, she stopped dead on the sidewalk. Her grip on Joseph's hand tightened protectively. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was low, controlled, but there was fear underneath. Alexander approached slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile that might shatter. "I needed to see you, both of you." "We're leaving," Carissa said, pulling Joseph closer. But Joseph was staring up at Alexander with that same intense curiosity from last night. "Mom, it's the scary man." "I'm not scary," Alexander said, crouching down instinctively to meet the boy's eyes. "I promise." "Don't," Carissa warned, her voice sharp. "Don't talk to him." Alexander looked up at her, and the pain in his expression made her breath catch. "Carissa, please, just 5 minutes. You lost that right 8 years ago." "I know," he said, standing slowly. "But he's my—" "Don't say it," she cut him off, glancing down at Joseph, who was watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes. "Not here." Alexander swallowed hard. "Then where? When?" Carissa's jaw tightened. She looked at Joseph, then back at Alexander, weighing options, calculating risks, trying to protect her son from a truth that was already starting to unravel. "Tonight," she said finally. "After he's asleep, you come to the apartment, we talk, then you leave." "And if I don't want to leave?" Her eyes hardened. "Then I'll make sure you do." Alexander nodded once, accepting the terms, because what choice did he have? Carissa turned to leave, but Joseph pulled on her hand. "Mom, who is he?" She knelt down, smoothing his hair, her voice gentle despite the tension radiating from her body. "Just someone Mom used to know, baby." Joseph looked back at Alexander one more time, studying him with an intelligence that seemed far too old for 8 years. "Are you sad?" the boy asked suddenly. The question hit Alexander like a punch to the chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Carissa stood quickly, pulling Joseph away. "Come on, sweetheart, relate." As they walked away, Joseph glanced back over his shoulder one more time, and Alexander saw something in his expression that nearly broke him. Recognition without understanding, a sense that something important was happening, even if he didn't know what. Alexander stood alone on the sidewalk, watching them disappear around the corner. And for the first time in 8 years, he realized the truth. Seeing them wasn't closure. It was the beginning of the hardest fight of his life.
Alexander's phone call came at exactly 7 a.m. the next morning. Carissa answered on the third ring, her voice still thick with sleep. "Hello?" "You said we'd talk." Alexander's voice came through, steady but strained. "I'm outside." She sat up in bed, her heart hammering. "It's 7 in the morning." "I know. I couldn't wait any longer." Carissa closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Part of her wanted to hang up, to pretend last night had been a bad dream, but she could hear something in his voice. Not the old arrogance, but something raw. Desperation, maybe, or grief. "Give me 30 minutes, she said finally. "I'll be here." When she opened the door 30 minutes later, Alexander stood there holding 2 coffee cups and a bakery bag from Sweet Corner, Joseph's favorite place, the one they went to every Saturday morning. "How did you know?" Carissa asked, staring at the bag. Alexander's expression was unreadable. "I asked around." The implications settled over her like cold water. He'd been watching, keeping tabs, knowing their routines even from a distance. "That's creepy," she said flatly. "I know," he admitted, "but I needed to know you were safe." Carissa wanted to be angry, but exhaustion won. She stepped aside. "Come in, but we have rules." Alexander nodded immediately. "Anything." She led him to the kitchen, keeping her voice low. "You don't tell Joseph who you are until I say so. You don't make promises you can't keep. And the second I say leave, you go. Understood?" "Understood." Joseph appeared in the doorway moments later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair sticking up in every direction. He stopped when he saw Alexander, curiosity replacing confusion. "It's the serious man," Joseph said. Alexander crouched slightly, making himself less imposing. "Good morning, Joseph. I brought breakfast." Joseph's eyes widened at the bakery bag. "From Sweet Corner?" "Your mom mentioned you like their chocolate croissants." Joseph looked at Carissa for permission. She nodded, and the boy practically bounced to the table. The morning unfolded in small, ordinary moments that felt monumental. Joseph knocked over his orange juice while reaching for a napkin. The glass tipped, liquid spreading across the table in a bright orange pool. Joseph froze, his face going pale. I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Hey," Alexander said gently, already reaching for paper towels. "Accidents happen, no big deal." He wiped up the spill without a hint of frustration, his movements calm and efficient. Carissa watched from the counter, her chest tight, because she remembered a different version of Alexander, the one who'd once slammed his fist on a table over spilled wine at a business dinner, the one whose temper had made her walk on eggshells for years. This man was different, or trying to be. After breakfast, Joseph dragged Alexander to the living room where a half-finished Lego set sat on the coffee table, a massive pirate ship with 1,000 tiny pieces. "Mom's not good at instructions," Joseph explained seriously, handing Alexander the manual. "Then we'll figure it out together." Alexander sat cross-legged on the floor in his expensive suit pants like it was the most natural thing in the world. Joseph directed every step with the confidence of a tiny general. "No, that piece goes here. You have to turn it. Not like that, like this." Alexander followed every instruction without complaint, letting an 8-year-old boss him around, his hands steady and patient as they worked. Carissa watched from the counter, her arms crossed, searching for cracks in the facade. But Alexander never showed frustration, never took over, never dismissed Joseph's input. "You're patient," Joseph observed after a while, glancing up at Alexander. "Your mom's very smart."
Alexander said. His hands paused on a Lego piece. She says patience is important because people make mistakes and you have to give them time to fix things. The words hung in the air, heavier than Joseph could possibly understand. Alexander's voice came out quieter. She's right about that too. Hours passed in a blur of Lego pieces, snack breaks, and Joseph's endless questions. Alexander answered each one thoughtfully, never talking down to the boy, never pretending to know things he didn't. When Joseph finally ran to his room to grab another toy, Carissa approached Alexander slowly. "You're doing well," she admitted, her voice careful. Alexander looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "Every second feels like a test I can't afford to fail." "It is," she said honestly. He nodded, accepting it. That evening, after Joseph had gone to bed, Alexander stood by the door, preparing to leave like he'd promised. But before he could reach for the handle, Carissa spoke. "You're different than I remember." He turned back, hope flickering across his face before he could suppress it. "I had 8 years to realize what I lost," he said quietly. Carissa's throat tightened. "And what did you lose?" Alexander looked toward the hallway where Joseph slept, then back at her. "Everything that mattered." The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. Joseph had been asleep for an hour, his bedroom door cracked open just enough for Carissa to hear if he woke. She sat on one end of the couch, Alexander on the other, a canyon of space between them that felt wider than 8 years. "I need you to understand something," Carissa said finally, her voice steady but her hands trembling in her lap. "I was pregnant when you threw that chair across the room." Alexander's entire body went rigid. His face paled. "The night of the charity gala," she continued, not looking at him. "You came home convinced I'd been with someone else. You'd seen photos, messages, something that made you believe I'd betrayed you." He remembered. God, he remembered every second of that night. The rage that had consumed him, the chair that had crashed against the wall so close to where she'd been standing that splinters had hit her arm, the way she'd flinched, terror replacing the love that used to live in her eyes. "I was 3 months pregnant," Carissa said, her voice cracking, "and I was terrified, not just of you in that moment, but of what you'd become, what you'd teach our child." "Alexander, let me finish," she cut him off, tears streaming down her face now. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I was terrified our child would grow up thinking that rage was love, that control was protection." Alexander's hands clenched into fists, not in anger, but in anguish. "There was no affair." "No," she confirmed. "There never was. Someone from your world fed you lies, manipulated evidence, wanted to destabilize you by destroying us. And it worked." The words hit him like physical blows. He'd suspected as much over the years, had pieced together the manipulation too late, but hearing her confirm it made everything worse. "Why didn't you tell me about Joseph?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Carissa looked at him then, really looked at him. "Because you would have taken over, made him a pawn in your world, surrounded us with guards and walls and danger disguised as protection until we couldn't breathe." Alexander wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth stopped him cold. "I would have," he admitted, his voice breaking. "You were right to leave." Carissa wiped her eyes. "Then why are you here now? Why show up after 8 years?" Alexander leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Because I want to be the man you needed me to be. Because I spent 8 years building an empire and realized none of it matters without you, without him." "It's too late for us," Carissa said softly. "I know, but it's not too late for him, for Joseph." Carissa stood, pacing to the window, staring out at the city lights. "You can't just walk into his life because you finally decided you're ready. He's not a business deal you can negotiate." "I know that too." She turned to face him. "If you want to know him, you follow my rules, completely. No exceptions, no leveraging your power or your money or your connections, anything," Alexander said without hesitation. "You come when I say you can come. You leave when I say you leave. You don't tell him who you are until I decide he's ready to hear it." Agreed. "And if I see even a hint of the old temper, if you scare him even once, you're gone forever." Alexander stood slowly, crossing the distance between them. He stopped just short of touching her, his voice raw with emotion. "I would rather disappear forever than hurt either of you again." Carissa searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the control that used to define him, but all she saw was grief and something that looked like genuine remorse. "One chance," Carissa said finally. "You get one chance to prove you've changed. That's all I'm asking for." She nodded, exhausted. "Then you can come back tomorrow. Joseph's been asking about you." Alexander's breath caught. "He has?" "He asked if you were sad," Carissa said quietly. "He's worried about you." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The child worried about the father who'd never known he existed. Alexander turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Carissa." "Yes?" "Thank you for keeping him safe, for being strong enough to leave." She didn't respond, but the tears that fell said everything words couldn't.
Alexander became a fixture in their lives, with the kind of quiet consistency he'd never shown in his previous life. Every morning at 8, he arrived. Every evening at 7, he left. No deviation, no excuses, no grand gestures. He learned Joseph's routines with the precision he once used to run criminal operations. Breakfast was always scrambled eggs, slightly runny, with strawberries cut into quarters. Bedtime was 8:30, preceded by exactly 2 stories, never more, never less. And thunderstorms terrified Joseph to the point where he'd hide under his bed, clutching a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunk. One afternoon, Alexander sat at the kitchen table trying to help Joseph with 3rd-grade math homework. Joseph had explained the problem 3 times, growing increasingly exasperated. "No, you add first, then multiply," Joseph said, pointing at the paper with his pencil. Alexander stared at the numbers. "That doesn't seem right." Joseph grabbed the answer key, scanned it, then looked at Alexander with the disappointment only a child could deliver. "You're wrong. I was right." "Then why did you need my help?" "I wanted to see if you knew," Joseph said seriously. "You failed." Alexander couldn't help it. He laughed, real and genuine, and Joseph grinned like he'd won a prize. Later that week, Joseph convinced Alexander to play video games. Alexander, who controlled empires and commanded fear with a glance, couldn't get past level 2 of a children's racing game. "You're really bad at this," Joseph observed, watching Alexander's car crash into a digital wall for the 5th time. "I'm starting to see that," Alexander admitted. "Do you want me to show you?" "Please." The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon when Joseph's favorite toy car, a vintage red model he'd had since he was 3, broke during play. The wheel snapped off, plastic pieces scattering across the floor. Joseph's face crumpled. Within seconds, he was sobbing, the kind of uncontrollable crying where breath comes in gasps. Carissa watched from the kitchen doorway, her body tense, waiting to see how Alexander would handle it. The old Alexander would have told Joseph to toughen up, that crying over toys was weakness, that men don't fall apart over small things. This Alexander knelt on the floor, gathering the broken pieces gently. "Hey," he said softly, "it's okay to be sad." "It's broken," sobs Joseph. "I can't fix it." "Maybe we can fix it together," Alexander offered, "and if we can't, we'll remember all the good times you had with it." Joseph threw his arms around Alexander's neck, still crying, and Alexander held him carefully, one hand on the boy's back, the other cradling his head. Carissa's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. The next day, Joseph was coloring at the table when he looked up suddenly. "Mom, can Alexander come to my school's Christmas concert?"
Carissa froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. When is it? Friday night. I'm singing a solo. Joseph turned to Alexander. Do you want to come? Alexander's throat tightened. Yes, I'd like that very much. Carissa hesitated, seeing all the complications, other parents asking questions, the risk of people from Alexander's world seeing him vulnerable in public. But when she looked at Joseph's hopeful face, she couldn't say no. If he wants to, she said carefully. I want to, Alexander confirmed. Friday night arrived too quickly. The school auditorium was packed with parents holding phones, grandparents with cameras, siblings squirming in seats. Alexander sat in the back row, wearing a simple sweater instead of his usual suit, trying to blend in, to be invisible, to be normal. The concert began with off-key renditions of holiday classics. Alexander watched every moment, even though Joseph hadn't appeared yet, because these were the ordinary moments he'd missed for 8 years. Then, Joseph walked onto the stage in a tiny shepherd costume, and Alexander's breath caught. Joseph sang his solo, slightly off-key but with such earnest concentration, and Alexander couldn't take his eyes off him. When the concert ended, parents flooded the hallway. Joseph burst through the crowd, spotted Alexander, and his entire face lit up. "You came!" Joseph shouted, running straight into Alexander's arms. Alexander caught him, lifting him up, and for a moment, the world disappeared. "I wouldn't have missed it," Alexander said, his voice thick. "Did you hear my solo?" Every word. Joseph beamed, and Alexander understood something profound. This was fatherhood, not control or protection or power, just showing up. Rachel Martinez arrived on Saturday afternoon without warning, letting herself in with the spare key she'd had for 6 years. She'd been Carissa's lifeline during the divorce, the friend who'd helped her disappear, who'd held her while she cried, who knew exactly what Alexander Williams was capable of. The moment she saw him sitting on Carissa's couch, her entire body went rigid. "You've got to be kidding me," Rachel said, her voice sharp as broken glass. Alexander stood immediately, recognizing the threat assessment happening in real time. "Rachel, it's okay," Carissa started. "It's not okay," Rachel cut her off, stepping protectively between Alexander and her friend. She looked at Alexander with undisguised contempt. "If you hurt them again, it won't just be her you answer to." Alexander didn't defend himself, didn't posture, didn't let his pride take over. "You're right to protect them." Blink, clearly not expecting agreement. "What?" "You're her friend. You were there when I wasn't. You have every right to hate me." Joseph appeared from his bedroom, oblivious to the tension. "Aunt Rachel!" He ran to her, and she scooped him up, her expression softening instantly. "Hey, little man, what's going on here?" Joseph pointed at Alexander. "That's Alexander. He's teaching me chess, and he's really bad at video games." Rachel's eyes narrowed as she set Joseph down. "Is that right?" Over the next hour, Rachel subjected Alexander to an interrogation disguised as casual conversation. Her questions were pointed, designed to expose weakness or deception. "So, Alexander, what exactly is it you do for a living?" "I run several businesses," he said carefully. "What kind of businesses?" "Import, export, real estate investments." Rachel's smile was cold. "And the other stuff, the stuff that made Carissa run in the first place." Alexander met her gaze directly. "I keep that world away from here. Always." "How can she trust that?" "She can't, not yet. That's why I'm here every day, proving it." Joseph interrupted, tugging Alexander's sleeve. "Can we watch the movie now? You promised." Alexander looked to Carissa for permission. She nodded, still uncertain about the whole situation. Joseph led Alexander to the TV, pulling up an old black-and-white film, It's a Wonderful Life, which he'd apparently seen a dozen times. "Mom doesn't like old movies," Joseph explained, "but I do. They're better." Alexander settled onto the couch, and Joseph curled up beside him naturally, easily, like they'd done this 100 times before. Rachel watched from the kitchen, her protective instincts warring with what she was seeing: genuine affection, careful patience, A dangerous man being gentle with a child. He needs stability, not drama, Rachel said quietly to Carissa. I know. So why is he here? Carissa watched Alexander point at the screen, explaining something to Joseph that made the boy laugh. Because Joseph asked for him, and I can't keep lying about who his father is. Rachel softened slightly, understanding the impossible position her friend was in. She approached Alexander as the movie played. He seems happy, she admitted grudgingly. That's all I want to give him, stability, presence, a father who shows up. Later that evening, Carissa's father called via video chat. David Chen, a retired engineer, practical and protective, who'd never trusted Alexander even before everything fell apart. Joseph answered, holding the tablet excitedly. Grandpa, guess what? Alexander's teaching me chess. I almost beat him yesterday. David's face appeared on screen, his expression neutral but watchful. Alexander? He's Mom's friend, Joseph explained. He comes over every day. Every day? David's eyes shifted, clearly looking for Carissa. Can I talk to your mom, buddy? Carissa took the tablet, moving to the bedroom for privacy, but not before David got a clear view of Alexander sitting on the couch. The conversation was brief but pointed. When Carissa emerged 15 minutes later, she looked exhausted. Alexander stood. I should go. Wait, Rachel said, surprising everyone. She looked at Carissa, then at Alexander. He deserves to know what we think. Alexander waited. If you hurt him, Rachel said slowly, if you bring your world anywhere near that child, I will make sure you regret it in ways your enemies never could. Alexander nodded once. Understood. But, Rachel continued, her voice softening, he lights up when you're here, and that counts for something. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door left open. What no one in that room knew, not Carissa, not Rachel, not even Alexander himself, was that someone from his past had been watching, someone who'd orchestrated the lies that destroyed their marriage 8 years ago, someone who now knew about Joseph. And in the criminal underworld Alexander had tried so desperately to keep separate from his new life, knowledge was power, and children were leverage. A black car had been parked across the street for 3 days. A camera with a telephoto lens had captured every moment. Alexander entering the apartment building, Joseph holding his hand, the three of them looking, for all the world, like a family. And in a darkened office across the city, those photographs were being studied by someone who had no intention of letting Alexander Williams find peace. Because the past doesn't forgive, and in Alexander's world, happiness was the most dangerous weakness of all. Will Alexander's attempt at redemption cost him everything? Can he protect Joseph from the very world he's trying to escape? And what happens when Carissa discovers that being with Alexander means putting their son in the crosshairs of his enemies? If you're invested in this family's future, if you need to know whether love can survive when the stakes are life and death, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment. Do you think Alexander can truly leave his past behind, or is he putting Joseph in danger just by being in his life? Because what happens next will test everything Alexander's been trying to prove, and the choice Carissa will have to make might destroy them all over again. This is a story about second chances and the price they demand, and we're only halfway through. They sat across from each other after Joseph had gone to bed, the weight of unspoken truths finally demanding to be heard. Carissa poured 2 glasses of wine, something she never did, but tonight required courage she could only find at the bottom of a bottle. You need to know everything, she said, her hands trembling slightly, about why I left, about who destroyed us. Alexander leaned forward, listening with the kind of focused attention he once reserved for business negotiations. But this wasn't business. This was the unraveling of his entire life. It was Victor Romero, Carissa said quietly, your former partner. Alexander's jaw tightened at the name. Victor had disappeared from the organization 7 years ago, presumed dead after a deal gone wrong, but Alexander had never found a body. He approached me at a charity event 6 months before I left, Carissa continued. Friendly at first, then he started showing me photographs, you with a woman at hotels, restaurants, always looking intimate, text messages that seemed to prove you were having an affair. I know that now, she cut him gently, but then I was already struggling with your temper, your unpredictability. The evidence seemed to confirm what I feared, that I wasn't enough for you. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. He manipulated both of us. Yes, but when I confronted you, you didn't ask for proof. You didn't question the accusations. You exploded. Her voice cracked. You chose rage over trust. The words hit him like physical blows. I did, and I've regretted it every day since. Carissa wiped her eyes. Victor wanted to destabilize you. Destroying your marriage was just the beginning. He knew your weaknesses, Alexander. He knew exactly how to make you self-destruct. Alexander stood, pacing to the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. I should have protected you better. You should have trusted me. He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw tears in his eyes. I did something I need to tell you about. Carissa's stomach tightened. What? I've been ensuring you and Joseph were safe, he admitted quietly. For years. Guards you never saw, security systems you never knew about. I made sure no one from my world could touch you. Carissa stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. You knew where we were? Yes. For how long? Since 6 months after you left, Alexander said. I hired investigators, found you in Seattle, then here when you moved. I never approached, never contacted you, but I needed to know you were okay. That's still controlling, Carissa said, her voice rising. That's still you deciding what's best without my consent. Alexander didn't defend himself. You're right. I'm sorry. The apology, simple and unqualified, took the wind out of her anger. The old Alexander never apologized, never admitted wrongdoing without deflection. Why tell me now? She asked. Because Joseph deserves a father who tells the truth even when it's ugly. He paused, his voice dropping. And because I asked you what I want from you. Carissa's heart hammered. What do you want? Alexander crossed the distance between them slowly, stopping just short of touching her. I want to be Joseph's father, really be his father, present, consistent, the man he can count on. And I want another chance with you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 8 years of grief and loss and possibility. Those are 2 different things, Carissa said carefully. I know, and Joseph comes first, always. Alexander's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. But I can't pretend I don't still love you, that I didn't spend 8 years realizing you were the only thing that ever mattered. Carissa's tears fell freely now. Love isn't enough, Alexander. It wasn't enough before. I know, he said softly, but maybe respect is, maybe patience is, maybe showing up every day and proving I've changed is. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the control, but all she saw was a man laid bare, vulnerable in a way he'd never allowed himself to be. I don't know if I can trust you again, she whispered. Then let me earn it, Alexander said, for as long as it takes. Carissa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on her. Open her heart to the man who'd broken it, or protect herself and risk denying Joseph the father he deserved. One day at a time, that's all I can promise. Alexander nodded, and for the first time in 8 years, he allowed himself to hope. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the kind of magic that only exists when snow falls softly and hope feels possible. Alexander stood in Carissa's kitchen, flour dusting his expensive sweater, watching Joseph meticulously arrange cookie cutters on the counter like a general planning battle strategy.
You have to do the stars first, Joseph explained seriously, then the trees, then the snowmen. That's the order. Alexander nodded with mock solemnity. The order. Got it. Carissa watched from across the kitchen island, her heart doing complicated things as Alexander followed Joseph's instructions without question, his large hands carefully pressing cookie cutters into dough, his serious face, as Joseph called it, focused entirely on getting the shapes perfect. You're doing it wrong, Joseph said, peering at Alexander's star. It's lumpy. I see that, Alexander admitted. Mom, he's really bad at cookies too, Joseph announced. Carissa laughed, and the sound filled the apartment with warmth Alexander wanted to bottle and keep forever. Maybe we should put him on frosting duty instead. They spent the afternoon creating chaos. Frosting smeared on counters, sprinkles everywhere, Joseph's tongue poking out in concentration as he decorated a tree cookie with green icing. Alexander sat beside him, carefully adding silver dragées to a snowman, and Carissa captured the moment with her phone camera, preserving something she never thought she'd see. Later, they moved to the living room where the Christmas tree waited for its final ornaments. Joseph pulled a delicate glass angel from the box, handling it with reverence. This one goes high, he said, looking at Alexander expectantly. Alexander lifted Joseph easily, holding him steady while the boy placed the angel near the top. When he set Joseph down, the boy grinned. You're useful. High praise, Alexander murmured. Carissa reached for a silver bell ornament at the same moment Alexander did. Their hands brushed, just fingertips touching, but the contact sent electricity through both of them. They froze, eyes meeting, the air between them suddenly charged with everything they weren't saying. Joseph, oblivious, continued decorating lower branches, humming off-key Christmas carols. Alexander's voice came out rough. Sorry. It's okay, Carissa whispered, but neither of them moved their hands. The moment stretched, fragile and precious, until Joseph called out, Mom, can Alexander stay for dinner, please? Carissa pulled her hand back slowly. It's Christmas Eve, sweetheart. Alexander probably has... I don't, Alexander said quickly, if you'll have me. Joseph cheered, pumping his fist in victory. Dinner was simple, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of ordinary meal that felt extraordinary because they shared it together. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen from down the hall, stopped by with cookies, her eyes curious as she spotted Alexander. Joseph answered the door, pulling her inside enthusiastically. Mrs. Chen, you have to try the cookies we made. My dad helped, but he's really bad at decorating. The words, my dad, hung in the air like a bomb dropped in slow motion. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. Carissa's fork clattered against her plate. Alexander stopped breathing. Joseph, still completely unaware of the earthquake he'd just triggered, continued cheerfully. See, these are the ones he made. Kind of lumpy, right? Mrs. Chen recovered first, her expression carefully neutral. They look delicious. I'll let you folks enjoy your evening. She left quickly, sensing the tension. Joseph turned back to the table, finally noticing everyone had gone silent. What? Carissa and Alexander locked eyes across the table, both emotional, both terrified, both overwhelmed by the simple, devastating innocence of a child's assumption. What? Joseph repeated, looking between them. He's here all the time. Isn't he my dad? The question hung in the air, impossible to ignore, demanding an answer neither adult was ready to give. But Joseph's innocent question just opened a door that can't be closed, and what Alexander and Carissa decide in the next moment will change everything. Can they finally tell him the truth? Will it bring them together or tear them apart forever? If you need to know what happens when this family faces their moment of truth, don't go anywhere because the answer is coming and it's going to break your heart wide open. Drop a comment. Should they tell Joseph tonight or wait? And hit subscribe because you won't want to miss how this family story unfolds. Carissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Joseph, sweetheart, can you clear your plate to the kitchen? The boy nodded, sensing something important was happening but not understanding what. As soon as he disappeared around the corner, Carissa grabbed Alexander's arm and pulled him toward the balcony. The cold night air hit them like a slap.
Snow continued falling softly, muffling the sounds of the city below. Carissa wrapped her arms around herself, her breath coming out in white clouds. "He's starting to attach to you," she said, her voice shaking. Alexander leaned against the railing, his hands gripping the cold metal. "Is that bad?" Carissa turned to face him, tears threatening. "Only if you leave." "I won't leave," Alexander said immediately, his voice fierce with conviction. "Don't promise," Carissa cut him off, her tone sharp. "Don't make promises you might not keep. Show me. Keep showing me." Alexander opened his mouth to argue, to swear on everything he held sacred that he meant it, but stopped. She was right. Words were cheap. He'd proven that 8 years ago when he'd promised to love and protect her, then destroyed everything with his rage. "You're right," Alexander said quietly. "I'll show you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Joseph's question pressing down on both of them. Finally, Carissa nodded toward the door. "We need to go back in. He's waiting." When they entered the apartment, Joseph was sitting on the couch, his small face serious, his hands folded in his lap like he was preparing for something monumental. He looked up as they approached, and the adult wisdom in his 8-year-old eyes made Alexander's chest ache. "Alexander," Joseph said, his voice steady but small, "are you my dad?" The room went silent. The Christmas tree lights blinked softly. Somewhere in the apartment, the refrigerator hummed, but all Alexander could hear was his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Carissa held her breath, her hand pressed against her chest. She looked at Alexander, and after what felt like an eternity, she gave the smallest nod. Permission. Alexander crossed the room slowly and knelt in front of Joseph, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. His hands were shaking, his voice cracked when he spoke. "Yes," he said softly, "if that's okay with you." Joseph's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Where were you before?" The question hit Alexander like a knife to the heart. He could feel Carissa watching, could feel the weight of 8 years of absence pressing down on him. He wanted to make excuses, to explain about the divorce and the lies and the manipulation, but Joseph deserved better than excuses. "I made mistakes," his voice breaking completely. "I wasn't ready to be the father you deserved." Joseph's tears spilled over. "Are you ready now?" Alexander's throat tightened. "I'm trying very hard to be." Joseph wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and when he spoke, his mother's wisdom echoed in his words. "Mom says trying isn't enough." Alexander felt his own tears fall, hot against his cold cheeks. "You're right. I'm doing it. Every day. I'm showing up. I'm learning. I'm being the father you deserve right now, not someday." Joseph studied him for a long moment, his small face serious, weighing whether to trust this man who'd been absent for his entire life. Finally, he spoke. "Okay," he said quietly, "but if you yell at Mom, you're in big trouble." Alexander let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Deal." Joseph threw his arms around Alexander's neck, and Alexander held him carefully, like holding something precious and breakable and infinitely valuable. Over Joseph's shoulder, he saw Carissa with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in 8 years, Alexander felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Joseph just gave Alexander something he never thought he'd have again, a chance to be a father. But acceptance is just the beginning. Christmas morning is coming, and with it, a moment that will either heal this broken family forever or reveal that some damage runs too deep to repair. What happens when they wake up as a family for the first time? You need to see this. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next will either destroy you with joy or break you with heartache, and you won't want to miss a single second. Alexander hadn't slept much. He'd lain on the couch in the dark, listening to the apartment breathe. The soft hum of the heater, distant traffic below, the occasional creak of floorboards. But mostly, he listened to the silence that came from finally being where he belonged. Christmas morning arrived with the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. Alexander was already awake when he heard small footsteps padding down the hallway. Joseph appeared in rumpled pajamas, his hair sticking up in every direction, eyes still heavy with sleep. When he saw Alexander sitting up on the couch, his face lit up with pure joy. "You stayed," Joseph whispered, like he'd been afraid it was a dream. "I stayed," Alexander confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Joseph ran toward him, then past him, calling out excitedly, "Mom, Dad, it's Christmas!" The word, Dad, stopped Alexander's heart. Joseph said it so naturally, so easily, like it had always been there, waiting to be spoken. Carissa emerged from her bedroom moments later, her auburn hair messy, wearing a soft robe over her pajamas. Her eyes found Alexander's immediately, and something passed between them. Gratitude, hope, the fragile beginning of healing. The living room became chaos as Joseph tore into presents with the enthusiasm only children possess. Wrapping paper flew everywhere. Alexander and Carissa sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching, occasionally catching each other's eyes and smiling at Joseph's reactions. Then, Joseph pulled out a small wrapped box from behind the tree, holding it carefully. "This one's for you, Dad." Alexander's hands trembled as he took it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a drawing. 3 stick figures stood in front of a Christmas tree. One tall figure with dark hair, one with long auburn hair, and one small figure between them, all holding hands. Above them, in Joseph's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family." Alexander's vision blurred, his chest constricted. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could barely hold the paper without his hands shaking violently. "Do you like it?" Joseph asked, suddenly uncertain. Alexander pulled Joseph into his arms, holding him tight, his face pressed against the boy's hair. "It's perfect," he managed to say, his voice breaking completely. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever been given." Joseph hugged him back, and Carissa turned away, wiping her own tears. Later, after the presents had been opened and Joseph was distracted building a new Lego set in his room, Carissa found Alexander in the kitchen, staring at Joseph's drawing, which he'd carefully placed on the counter. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, not looking up, "for giving me this chance." Carissa poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward him. "Thank Joseph. He's the one who chose you." Alexander finally looked at her. "What about you?" Carissa studied his face, the man who'd terrified her, who'd broken her, who'd spent weeks proving he'd changed. She saw the vulnerability he never used to show, the patience he never used to have, the love that had always been there but was finally learning to express itself without violence or control. "I'm choosing to believe you've changed," she said carefully. "That's enough for now," Alexander replied, and meant it. They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, listening to Joseph's excited narration from his bedroom as he built his Lego creation. Carissa set her cup down and turned to face Alexander fully. 8 years, she whispered. "We lost 8 years." "I know," Alexander said, "and I can't give them back, but I can be here for every day going forward." Carissa stepped closer, and before either of them could overthink it, she kissed him. It was soft, tentative, testing whether the spark still existed beneath all the hurt. It did. When they pulled apart, Joseph's voice rang out from the hallway. "Finally!" They turned to find him standing there, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "I thought you two would never figure it out." Carissa laughed through her tears. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," Joseph said wisely, then ran back to his room. The rest of Christmas Day unfolded with the kind of ordinary magic families create,
Board games at the kitchen table, a dinner of turkey and mashed potatoes, Christmas movies playing on the television while Joseph fell asleep between his parents on the couch. As evening fell and snow continued to drift past the windows, a passerby on the street below looked up at the third-floor apartment. Through the glass doors and illuminated windows, they saw a perfect tableau: a man in a dark sweater, a woman with auburn hair, and a small boy between them, all laughing at something on television, the Christmas tree glowing behind them. The man who'd once stood frozen outside those glass doors, staring at a life he couldn't touch, was now inside, part of the warmth, part of the light, part of the family. Alexander Williams had finally come home. This is where most stories end, with the family reunited, love rekindled, happiness restored. But in Alexander's world, happy endings don't come without a price, because someone's been watching, someone from his past who knows about Joseph now, and what happens next will test everything this family just built. If you think this story is over, you're wrong. The real test is just beginning. Subscribe now, drop a comment telling me if you cried, and get ready for the twist that changes everything. Because redemption isn't just about earning love, it's about protecting it when your past comes back to destroy it.